You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It's Thursday, December 4th, 2025 at 7:38 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And tonight I thought I would talk about the art of staying with, building tolerance for vulnerability in relationships. So the ability to stay with something. Uh, um, and really what we're talking about in this case then is emotional regulation, surprisingly. In order to stay with something, you have to be able to stay with the emotional experience of being with it, which means that you're going to be taking on things and engaging in things that will fall neatly within the window of tolerances that you have. And those windows of tolerances for difficult emotions, of course, are narrow or great, depending on the early family conditioning that you had. The greater the capacity to hold difficult emotions, the bigger the risks that you can take, and the smaller the capacity to hold intense emotions, the narrower the risk band you have. Come in. Lucy has a little bit of the Zooms tonight, so we'll see how it goes. Um, so, in the beginning, of course, when we're talking about examining your early conditioning, and particularly your attachment conditioning, really the place we start is with emotional regulation because it really is the foundation. Uh, if you want to be authentic in your expression, you have to be willing to tolerate the experience of abandonment. I like to say, in order to be authentic, you have to be willing to be abandoned. In order to be completely authentic, you have to be willing to be completely abandoned. Who is willing to be abandoned? People who are confident that they'll be able to find people that will then take them in, or that you're confident that you've built out a social network that's resilient enough that if one person abandons you, the rest of the social frame will hold you. And of course, if you can't build out a social network that's supportive in that way, the risk taking that you're willing to do that would result in abandonment becomes impinged, to use a word. And the greater that impingement, the more difficult it is for you to be authentic or to be vulnerable in your representation of who you are. Um, the One of the things that I think is important to understand about these divergence from the authentic self and the ease of being authentic into the false self, that either idealizing version or that pretend version of who you are, that willingness to be invisible in relationships starts before you have a self experience. So you don't really have uh, necessarily an understanding of when you decided to do that. Some of us, of course, it comes a little bit later, and we make a decision about it. Do you remember making a conscious decision that you weren't going to trust anybody? Do you remember making a conscious decision that you were going to go it alone because everyone was so undependable? So that would have been late, a little bit later, when 4, 5, 6, something like that. But if it starts really early, where who you are, that innocent child, that infant that you express spontaneously is not well received, you squash it and begin to become who you need to become in order to fit into your family system. And we all do it because our survival depends on it, or at least that's how it appears to us. We fold, we acquiesce, we become who they want. So, in order to come out of that and to come into a place where we can be vulnerable, that is to say, we can express ourselves authentically, even if we think that there's a complication in that expression or it isn't going to be received well, we have to be able to hold that emotional experience. We have to be able to mentalize it. We have to be able to uh, um, allow the risk. Secure people, of course, can do this pretty well because they have the experience of being able to express that. If you were to think about it in child terms, in young child terms, were you able to express your displeasure, the difficulties, the frustration of your childhood? And did your caregivers provide a big enough container that they could hold that and respond to you without withdrawing from you? That would be the equation. You've heard it described as the terrible twos, right? When the child becomes defiant. What's actually happening is at around 18 months, uh, what a process of autonomy is supposed to happen, right? The child separates out of that strong identification with the primary caregiver and recognizes that they actually have their own agenda, which is different than the agenda of the caregiver. And because they're so powerless in relationship to the capacities of the caregiver, they're easily frustrated when their agenda does not take the day. And depending then how the caregiver negotiates that is this divergence between feeling free to express uh, the difficulties that you experience from being unwilling to do that early conditioning. Of course, then you carry that out into life. From that point on, you have that early period of conditioning, and then the birth of the self experience, and then off you go to school, where you encounter everybody else's attachment conditioning, and begin to try to form alliances with people, with relationships with people outside of your own family system. Of course, you don't have the cognitive ability to really discern a whole lot in that environment. You like some people, you don't like some people. Some people are mean, some people are not. In The Guardian last week, there was a report that they've changed the timing of the development of the brain. So the first period stays about the same from 0 to 9 is childhood, and then you enter adolescence, and the brain develops to where you have that full adult cognitive capacity, whereas it used to be thought that that happened sometime in your mid 20s. They're now saying that you don't come out of adolescence until you're 32. It's a long development, right? From 9 to 32, you begin to develop the cognitive capacity that you're going to use. The That was also nice too, because they also used to say that you enter into old age at 55, but now, of course, uh, they've added 10 years. So 66 is now the brain moving from the adult years into the old age years, even though the body probably still goes at 55. At least you can cling to the mind. So then the question is, you walk out of childhood with the capacities that you have, right? That have been instructed, that you've dutifully taken on as a child and learned the family system so that you can pass it along to your children if you don't interfere with it in that generational transmission that we all do. But what if, as you get to your early 30s and you examine your capacities for things, you realize that actually this isn't the best set of tools that I've ever seen on the planet. What do I do now? How do I begin to change that? And as it turns out, you can do some things that will change it, and some things you can't change so much. I think that one of the things that can interfere with the capacity really to change this stuff is the either the failure to grieve or the unwillingness to grieve what actually did happen. And so part of this is an investigation and seeing clearly what happened. Most of us are going to grow up in a kind of mixed bag, some good things, some bad things. Are um, The trick with attachment, of course, is that care trumps love in this, that you can have good enough care that's not particularly loving and still end up secure or close to secure. Whereas if you grow up in a loving family where the care is poor, you're not likely to end up secure because the consistencies that a child needs, the reliability that the child needs, the narrow band of reactions that are useful means that the caregivers have to contain what's happening in the space so that you don't have these big reactions to what's happening. Reliability is the thing that matters mostly, and insecure and disorganized households don't have that predictability, that reliability. This goes right back to the basic human brain function. Um, our brains predict outcomes. That's one of the things that they do, and it's at all of these levels of the development of meaning. I think, as I recall, 5 levels of this development in the translation of the raw sensing data into the conceptual reality, the meaning that we assign to it. And so the first level is predicting what the sensing experience is going to be. And then the second level is predicting what the sensing experience might mean all the way up to the final meaning that you assign to it. It's the capacity, the accuracy of being able to predict what's going to happen that creates a sense of safety, a sense of security. If you're able to predict what it's going to be and that's what it is, that produces that sense of reliability, that sense of safety. Because if you mispredict, you have to reassess, right? Which is a heavy burden on the brain. So you're thinking something's going to happen and something completely different happens, then you have to roll into the reassessment. Uh, so in childhood, children really need the environment to be stable enough that they can develop that capacity to predict what's going to happen at the somatic level and then up into the cortexes and the higher meaning levels. Is that all making sense? And if you have a caregiver who is willing to tolerate that, you've seen children stomping around, demanding that their agenda be honored, even though that's not what's going to happen. How do you manage that? And how did your caregivers help you manage that so that you felt a sense of being contained and a sense of being connected and a sense of not being ridiculed and abandoned, which can easily happen when caregiver loses their temper in response. Children are these little balls of energy that just keep going and going. How do you relate to that? And how are you related to it? It's a good indication of what happened. So here we find ourselves conditioned beings in these bodies that work the way that they work. How then do we train ourselves to extend the capacity of emotional intensity? Um, Mainly, I think the noting feeling states technique, the meditation technique, is the best way to do that. It creates sensory clarity so you know what's actually happening. And then as you develop the habit of watching these arising and passings, these waves of emotion that arise and pass, the clearer that you can see the whole cycle of arising and passing, the easier it is to hold intensity. When you don't pay attention to the passing away of these things, when you don't experience it as wave-like, when your attention is simply drawn to the arising of things and the arising of things, and the arising of things, it's easy for the mind to make it into an unending wall of intense emotion and then to develop an aversive response to that unending, difficult emotional experience. But when you pay attention and you see these discrete waves of arising and passing, then even the most intense emotional experience you can stay with. Uh, how long is a really intense wave of emotion going to last? 8 seconds? 10 seconds? 20 seconds? 20 seconds would be a really long time for a single wave of emotion to arise and pass. And most of us can hold on for dear life for 20 seconds and then settle and come back in for the next wave of intensity. What we're really going for is this idea of being effortlessly authentic. Can we tell people what's true for us? Um, in the present moment. I like to say the eternity of the present moment. We're never not in the present moment except when we're distracted by thinking or asleep. It's always the present moment. And the present moment is remarkably short. One moment, the next, the next, the next, the next, the next, the next. Of course, if you lose track of that, it can turn into a wave of continuousness that is very hard to hold. But when you really see that it's one moment followed by the next moment, these waves of arising and passing, uh, you can be with it. The complication for insecure, disorganized people, of course, is that you're not authentic to begin with. You can't bear the idea that you might be abandoned. And so instead of presenting yourself authentically and getting the reassurance of the person staying with you, that's the thing that relieves that anxiety. That you say how it is for you, how you describe your experience of the present moment in a complete way, and then they stay or they don't stay. But if they stay, you don't worry about whether they're going to discover your misrepresentations and then leave because they've already discovered it and they've already stayed. That's the thing that relieves the anxiety. Of course, after you've not presented yourself authentically over and over again, it begins to build up this apprehension about what happens when they figure out that I'm not being authentic. Unless you're so far down the rabbit hole of inauthenticity that you don't know what's authentic anymore, which can happen. So I like to say that you want to begin to shift into being authentic. You don't really even have to say anything. This moment was pretend mode or idealization, and the next moment you were just authentic. And most people won't really notice the shift from inauthenticity to authenticity. Um, but if they do, you can say something along the lines of, well, I thought about it, and I know that I did say the other things that I said, but I've changed my mind. And everybody changes their mind. So you can use that as a way of shifting from one to the other. I'm sort of talking about an innocent quality of inauthenticity just from the internal fight. Of course, some people are actually intentionally manipulative. That's a little bit different. And you would have to stop that. You have to be willing to stop that. The problem with that, of course, is that if you learned in your family system how to manipulate and you understood that that was actually the system of navigating life, what you're going to have to convince yourself of is that it's not actually a good idea, and that you need to then learn a different skill for negotiating in relationships to get what you want. And most people who grow up in those kinds of family systems have zero faith that a straightforward ask is going to get them anything, because it doesn't work in the family system that they grew up in. You have to change your mind about that. Of course, if you put yourself out authentically, the people that are interested in that presentation are going to be the ones drawn to you. And if that inauthentic expression is different, really different from the authentic expression, you may find that when you begin to express authentically, that they don't want that. And that's fair enough, right? You misrepresented who you were in order to attract them, because that's who you thought you wanted, and then throw off the cloak of inauthenticity and stand there naked in your vulnerability, and they say, this is what I signed up for. I'll see you. Do recognize the trap that if you bring somebody in and relate to them on an inauthentic basis, you're vulnerable to them not wanting the authentic expression and legitimately not having signed up for it. A lot of us think that we can, that they'll magically see through our presentation to the core, the nugget of who we are. But that's not really how the human condition operates. People really do accept what you tell them as an authentic expression most of the time. So then you begin to be authentic, and then what you'll notice is that the people who want that are drawn to you, and then you can begin to build relationships that are based on that. And you do have to also consider consent. What are they consenting to? What are you consenting to in the relationship? A legitimate, authentic consent. Not the manipulative variety where you're consenting but not really consenting. You're accepting consent but not really accepting it. And then you go along at a slow pace, presenting small pieces of your authentic experience to them and see how they do with it. And if they're delighted and they're reliable, you offer them a little bit more. And you open gradually into this place where they really see you clearly in an authentic expression of who you are. And then they stick around and they treat that with great value, which is really what we're looking for. People who see us and know us as we are and really value that. Then the vulnerability piece isn't so impossible as it is before that. If you really don't have much of a sense that people see you and know you and you're in a dependent position to them, then vulnerability becomes impossible. Make sense? So in building up that capacity to hold intense emotions, You can begin this in the smallest way, shifting into a more constant presentation of yourself. One of the challenges is that when you grow up in family systems where you don't feel highly valued, you might risk um, uh, uh, vulnerable expressions with people that have not demonstrated a sufficient valuing of you. And so we have to change our mind about how valuable we are and what we have to offer to people so that we're not making mistakes along these lines. The reason why it's important to pay attention to that is because if you make a mistake and you risk vulnerability with somebody and they disappoint you, it can easily reinforce the idea that you shouldn't continue into this freedom to be effortlessly authentic. But that place is really the place where exploration can happen. The attachment system is linked to the exploration system. In order for the exploration system to really open up, the attachment system has to shut down. And if it shuts down completely, then you have the potential for the exploration space to really open up. But what you have to be able to do is pull your attention away from a vigilance about the environment that you're in so that you can settle into this liminal space where the exploration system activates and this freedom to really just explore opens up. And to the degree that you have to stay vigilant with the environment that you're in and protective of what might happen in the environment you're in, it really impinges and shuts down the capacity to open that space to explore. This is another way in which we get directed into the false self early in life. That if you grow up in an environment where you're never really protected and safe from intrusions from the environment, you never stop the vigilance of monitoring the environment, and that space never completely opens up. And then your ability to solve the dilemmas of creativity aren't available to you, and so it becomes a frustrating space, a space that doesn't really provide the level of meaning that it's cracked up to be. But if you can create this sense of protection, this sense of safety in that social network that you develop for yourself, then you can just let go of that vigilance completely and settle into this exploration space, this creative space that then opens, and you can head off without knowing the destination and pivot and turn and move as the results of the exploration come in, of the actions that you take, and end up in the place that you're supposed to go to in this natural process that's quite free. And the more vigilant you are, and the more sensitive you are to the reactions of people around you, the less freedom you have, and the more you're intending results or directing results. It's very easy to flip out of that primary exploration for meaning into a secondary exploration, which is the gathering of time, energy, and resources, or approval even. from other people. Do you notice that sense? Some people have shame. Not everybody has shame. Some people have shame. Uh, you learn shame in that early childhood experience because you're shamed by your caregivers. Uh, Not everybody has that. Christian.
George, do you like, I don't know, in a Buddhist sense or in an attachment sense, or kind of just in your view, do you have a concept of like a healthy shame or
Oh, um, well, if we talk about shame and guilt, a healthy sense of guilt, the energy that propels you to meet your obligations that you've made in a legitimate way. Uh, you know, long day's work, you come home, and your little dog bounds up to you, holding the leash, ready to go out for their evening walk. And you're thinking, I'm tired. I don't want to do this. And then you feel guilty, and then you take the dog out. That would be good. Um, Shame then is the whole person, a devaluing of the whole person. The whole person that you are is not worth it. So I don't know if I would say that there's a way to use that.
so
But I
maybe
think often in our culture, they're used interchangeably.
maybe what some people might call a healthy shame you might categorize as under guilt.
Yeah. Um, I don't think you should shame children for being children, which is where we all learn it. Um, you're so much bigger, so much supposedly developed, more developed than a child. Uh, at what point does a child become devaluable? I don't know. I know that uh, if you can get away without doing it, it would be better for everyone on the planet. Um, and I think that it often comes from rejection. Uh, caregivers are supposed to regulate the environment for the child, and they're supposed to help the child navigate the environment. And if they don't have that help, they can run amok pretty easily. And then they run amok, and then uh, um, the caregiver, rather than responding in a good way, can respond in a bad way to that. And it's a kind of rejecting or a withdrawal of interest and attention, which I think is the result of that. But it mainly is about how the caregiver thinks that they appear to other adults rather than the child. I'm a bad, they'll think I'm a bad caregiver. I'm a bad mother, I'm a bad father. And then they blame the child for that perception. Rather than seeing the child as a child and helping the child navigate. A child goes into the drugstore and you're futzing around and not really paying attention. And when you get home, you realize that their pockets are stuffed with candy, which you've stolen because you left with your child. But somehow the child stole it. But the child didn't understand the economics of candy, and they just saw that they wanted it, and they knew that if they asked their caregiver, the caregiver would say no, and they couldn't resist the impulse to have the candy, and so they hid it. But they were hiding it from the caregiver more likely than intending to steal it and walking out of the store. how did that go when you did that? Because most of us will have done that.
George, you're saying a good caregiver then realizes at that moment that the child is finally useful for something?
Right. And takes them right over to the jewelry store. Put the candy back, right? Oh my God. I remember that with my sister. We went to the Five and Dime and we were all running around in it. And when we were walking out, uh, uh, my sister was in the back, but she was holding a doll, uh, which was no longer in the package, which really made my mother mad because she was going to have to buy the doll because my sister had ripped open the package and took the doll out of it. But actually, it was on her because she wasn't paying attention to us in the store. She was doing something else. A small thing, maybe. Of course, the exciting thing about all of this is that the more you do it, the more resilient you become. And the more fluid you are in analyzing what the consents are that you have and what your relationship is. Is it an intimate relationship where you have an obligation to tell everything? Is it a not close relationship where you have some leeway with what you can tell, which is in the consent of the relationship? And are you not driven by the intense emotional or the volatility of emotional internally so that you can regulate and present just what you want to based on the relational agreements you have? That would be ideal. And the more practice you have at it, the more uh, ease you'll have at it. So the first time you do it, it's just this huge abandonment terror. And then you push in and present authentically, and then the abandonment terror goes away as you're accepted, but then you're sideswiped by the terrible sadness and the recognition that you could have been authentic all along and it would have had a good result, and that long ago you could have abandoned the habit of inauthenticity. And one time, 10 times, 100 times you do that, and then you don't have that abandonment reaction. You don't have that sadness because you're not misrepresenting yourself. And you go, unfortunately, uh, clearing up one area doesn't do much for other areas. And one area might open quite easily, and other areas might be impacted based on conditioning. And so, and everybody, of course, everyone's conditioning is unique. So what's easy for you might not be for somebody else, and what's easy for them might not be for you as you begin to work through it until you come into a place of effortless authenticity. And that is to say that you go to authenticity and you look to express yourself authentically in the context of the consent that you have and the consent that you've given. The trick about consent, of course, is that how your consent was appreciated as a child. Did your caregivers have a sensitivity to it? Did they attempt to elicit your consent, or did they simply bulldoze your consent in navigating the environment for you? Or did they betray your consent in some way, which can happen? And so we're going to have to revive our concept of consent, which is freely given and uncoerced, and freely accepted and uncoerced. And if there's a conflict around it, a negotiated consent that is a win for both parties. Ultimately, that's where we're trying to get to. Is that all making sense? What do you say we do a little bit of practice? Why don't we do some noting feeling states technique? What do you think? So let's start with some concentration, and we'll go into the noting feeling states. So go ahead and settle into your meditation posture. Okay, let go of the meditation. How's that?
It was good. It's always good. It's the most useful thing I have right now is
Oh,
this
good.
learning my emotions.
Good. I thought that way too. I just did it everywhere I went.
I just had various flavors of anger at my stupid body and how it was feeling uncomfortable.
So I'm looking at the calendar, and the last thing we have coming up this year is our 5-day retreat, which is starting on December 29th and going until Friday the 2nd from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Pacific time. Take a look at that. We're going to cover most of the material in level 2 and do a lot of sitting. And one thing you don't get so much in the regular level 2 is also a lot of poetry, which I like to add to the retreat. So come along and see that. And then we can talk about next year. We have a level 1 starting on the 10th of January. That's a hint that's coming. Thanks so much for your practice. I really appreciate it. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that if you're able to make a donation, you will. There's a link on the website to make the donation. Any amount is helpful. It helps support me and also the work that Mettagroup is doing. Appreciate you and see you soon. Bye.